You don't know a person until you have their definition of the word love. You also don't know a person until they give you their version of history and their vision of an ideal future. You also don't know a person until you get their explanation of who, what, when, where, and how they originated, and the meaning and purpose of life. If you don't know these things, or at least have a coherent and sufficient working model of some kind, then you are completely blind and have no high ground over anyone. Such people ought not to claim any moral high ground over anyone, nor LARP as gurus giving lethal advice. Such people ought not to virtue signal and wear a mask portraying themselves as a good and trustworthy person either, because they certainly are not, and their whole identity is a malignant and exploitative lie. I'll give you a simplified version of my model that works better than any other model made before it, with no contradictions or flaws. More can be found in a long story, which you can watch on my website and elsewhere in thousands of hours of videos, audio logs, writings, and recorded discussions and debates and more. This story and model is extensively backed up by evidence, and a tidal wave of new discoveries in physics, astronomy, archaeology, genetics, revelations in suppressed history, and even the logical reasoning abilities of recent artificial intelligence are constantly proving it. Many things I was historically and repeatedly ridiculed, gaslighted, and aggressively attacked over saying have now become mainstream beliefs among those you would call experts. But of course it apparently never happened, and I apparently don't exist. There are things that exist, and there are things that don't exist. Things that exist only exist in a specific range of time in a greater scale of time. Like you exist for about 80 years, but a long time exists before you were born and after you die. Things that existed in the past no longer exist, as many would say, but the impact those things had changed the future as a consequence of their existence. In a passive form, they still exist in the heritage those things passed on, whereas in the past they took a more active role. All things that exist anywhere in a given timeline are part of an equation, a complex and messy algorithm of interactions. Single entities that are derived from smaller components, and they themselves are a component in greater single entities, in a big, single, interactive equation. In an equation, different numbers exist in different places, just like different people in the timeline of your universe. But they're all part of the same equation, at some point at least. Part of the same equation, but not equal. Each unique and independent, each plugged into a network with their own input and output. Each interacts with others in the network, observes the conclusions of others, and independently comes to their own conclusion regarding right and wrong, what has value, what doesn't have value, and which value weighs more than another value. A value can only be measured and seen for its worth by comparing and measuring it against other values. Each value and each independent conclusion is like a leaf on a tree. That tree is the equation, and when the tree branches out in many directions with many leaves, and those leaves are like eyes that can detect light, the collective sight of all leaves combined allow a tree to determine the direction and location of the sun. Imagine that a long time ago, many things that existed came to their own conclusions, but they know that there's more out there that exists, that they've never seen and maybe never will. So they search for ways to discover and interact with others that might exist out there somewhere in the dark, to compare and measure values, for all sides that involve themselves to gain a clearer vision of the sun, of values. Imagine that they have done all that, but there are still places yet to explore. Imagine that there is a place between existing and not existing, a vast dormant void of potentials that never made it. A place where things that exist and things that don't exist overlap, contradict, and cancel each other out in a chaotic ocean. Without some kind of protection, things that exist cannot survive there. They slowly get melted away by the contradiction and hypocrisy, absorbed into the void as part of the dormant, chaotic ocean. Who knows what fell into that void over time, and what existed there all along? While a leprechaun riding a unicorn doesn't exist, the concept of it does. That concept wasn't invented, but discovered by someone at some point. Before it was discovered, it always existed in a dormant, formless state. It always has and always will remain in a place between existing and not existing as a dormant, chaotic potential, in an incoherent, dreamlike state, until it either exists or gets destroyed somehow. The void isn't just an intellectual idea like the number 3, but a real place with semi-coherent physical properties that in different circumstances can partially interact with things that exist. It's actually a component in the universe as you know it, like a sheet of paper laid over a top of water, and the ocean being the void being the water. There's a lot more I could say that's explained in my story and elsewhere, but that should explain the basics. Imagine that something or someone that exists creates a great machine to animate the void and explore the potential values within, so they can be added to the greater equation. But the problem is, whenever anything that exists goes into the void, it gets absorbed and dies if not protected. And if it is protected, the void automatically responds to the will of that which exists, and whatever fragile dormant free will it has gets destroyed in the process. The great machine exists for the purpose of animating the void, just a part of it, to harvest potential values without interfering with its free will. It must come to its own independent conclusions without interference, or else its free will is permanently destroyed. When you change human nature, it's no longer human nature but a lifeless puppet to your own. The evolutionary process, when not tampered with, is the great machine's method of harvesting and refining values from the void. Most of what you think you are is a biological automaton, a robot, a vacuum cleaner that animates a few droplets from the ocean of the void. Different genetic lines refine themselves to target specific areas of dormant potential in the void. The biological automaton isn't really you. You aren't really a person. You are a moral compass, a vector. You are an independent network of values, a puddle of water that was drawn up from the ocean of the void. Your biological automaton construct is still under construction and still refining itself, being the gene pool that you belong to, evolving to more accurately target and refine values from the void. But whoever made the great machine, they don't have any control or interaction with that evolutionary refinement. The values it harvests from the void, they are what decide what the direction and the refinement process. The values it harvests from the void, they are what decide the direction of the refinement process, and in doing so, they retain their independence. They choose their own form, their own direction, and their own conclusion. They go from a dream to the real, and take up their place as a unique independent leaf on the tree, and their input will add to the equation and make the sun all the more clearer. And as for the hypocrisy that cancelled it out and held it back in the void, it has to be completely and irreversibly destroyed to free those values from their eternal prison. You're living in a dream universe. You and many others are the dreamers. But you don't control the rules and mechanics of the dream world. That's controlled by a machine made by someone else. You can't control that, but you do control the path of your biological automaton's evolution. And you can only interact and change things within the dream world as much as the already established rules and mechanics allow you to. You are dreaming in a womb and still under construction. You're in the process of becoming real, if you make it. You didn't start this, but you do decide the direction and destination. Most of you have not begun to wake up yet. Those who are awake believe they're asleep, while those who are asleep believe they're awake. Beware the hypocrites who turn everything back to front, upside down, and inside out. Don't live your life in pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. That is shallow, self-serving, and pathetic. The pursuit of pleasure is a Trojan horse. It is the primal, dormant, default position of an inactive, unconscious creature acting on basic impulse. If the content of a cup is water, the pursuit of pleasure is air. The pursuit of pleasure is that which is left over in the absence of content. The more one pursues pleasure, the more hollow they are. The pursuit of pleasure is not the meaning or purpose of life, but the corruption of a primal impulse outside of its intended purpose. The pursuit of happiness is a Trojan horse, and those who pursue happiness will only find it gets further away from them the more they try. Happiness is something out of your hands that you can get as a result of what other people do on their own free will. Happiness is not required to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. And to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, you need to abandon happiness. Beware con artists who sell happiness. It's all a big act, a scam. They are not happy. They cast a trap, a net, to catch, undermine, and redirect the potentials. Behind their mask, they are ravenous wolves who, like a vampire or a cup with the bottom cut out, are never satisfied and have a spiteful grudge against others for having what they will never have. Content. Content may not bring happiness, but it does bring contentment. The avoidance of pain is cowardice and also a Trojan horse. It shows that you stand for nothing, and like the pursuit of pleasure, you have no higher value for anything other than your own corrupted, self-serving impulses, at any cost to others, even yourself. And those who stand for nothing will fall for anything and lose everything. People who are scared of germs, paranoid of being stalked, blindly accept whatever celebrities or authorities tell them, or blindly reject a claim based on rumors and the reputation of whoever said it. These people should not be considered people, but broken biological automatons that never achieved sentience, no different to a brain-dead corpse kept alive by a machine. You were all born into this world with a lot of questions and few answers. The world you were born into, you know it's fucked up, and as children, most of you wanted to fix it. But as you grew older, you forgot who and what you are, if that still is who and what you are and the flame hasn't completely snuffed out yet. Those that made the world the way it is today, and who invented false virtues and false narratives of history to justify their many evil deeds today, have developed over thousands of years a method to systematically snuff out the flame you were born with, and make you give up and go along with great evils your ancestors would die fighting against. They keep you occupied with needless diversions, constantly reminding you that your sacrifice is necessary to maintain paradise. And if you don't think it's a paradise, there's something wrong with you, and a white van comes at 3 AM. With a rigged mouse wheel game, you can never win unless you're one of them. They bait your greed with profit, and play on your fears if you walk outside the yellow lines. If you're playing a game of Monopoly, and one player controls the bank, and they start cheating, don't continue playing the game. You pick up the board, and you smack the shit out of them with it. They've convinced you into playing a rigged game you cannot win, with promises you know they never keep, and yet you keep playing with a plastic carrot held in front of you, with the perpetual promise that next time it will be fair. And you keep doing it, over and over again. And you have children, and their children were born into a world where they never even knew any different, and start thinking this is normal. Indoctrinated into a psychological spell, a lifelong stupor from cradle to grave. And most of you happily go along with it, and those who claim not to be, go along with it more than ever. Hypocrites. But for the few who truly don't, there is an elaborate system called psychiatry to identify, disable, and eliminate them. And if you think it's bad now, just wait until they finish setting up the new system I warned you about for a long time now. You thought I was crazy, but everything I said was proven true in the end, and not once was I ever proven wrong. Your generation is the most hated of every generation in the entire history of mankind. But even within this generation, there are a few small, undetected, strategically planted seeds that were secretly planted, who are the most admired above any other. And these are the generals in my army, the judges in my courts, the vigilantes in the shadows you never knew existed. What your generation wastes, many other generations would sacrifice everything they had for a chance to be here and now, to make a difference where it mattered most, at the crossroad to all things, the time that made or broke your heritage. People who can't coherently and sufficiently explain who they are, what they are, where they came from, where they're going, why they're going there, and the meaning of life, should not be giving advice as the blind gurus leading the blind. If you can't sufficiently answer these things, and your history is full of covered up immoral deeds, and your whole identity is a farce, you have no high ground over anyone. You don't have the right or the qualification to advise, judge, or accuse. You shut your fucking mouth and kneel in the presence of those who do, by force or by choice. Hypocrites don't get to speak. Hypocrites don't get to involve themselves in the now or the future. Hypocrites do what they're told, or they die in a lesson and deterrent that will never be forgotten to the end of time. And for the hypocrites in positions of ill-gotten entrusted power, such as governments, it will be better for them that they were never born, because of what is coming upon them. Your time here is limited. Don't waste it. I have a rule. No matter what you know or believe, live every day as though it could be your last. Take the position of a mortal on their last day, with no afterlife, and no one will remember you after you're gone. If you take that position, you will focus on what matters and always be grounded, no matter what you know or believe, no matter what information you come across, no matter what situation you find yourself in. And I argue that none of us are meant to know. Imagine if there was an afterlife, and you confirmed it. Compare that to the life of someone who didn't know. Your whole life would become meaningless and insincere, because there are no serious consequences. Well, their life would be meaningful and sincere no matter what happens. You came from darkness, and you may very well go back to darkness very soon, never to return. In the vast timeline of all things, you've been given a brief moment where you have a chance to see during a short-lived spark of light. You were given eyes and a mind to see, if just for a brief moment. Don't spend that moment with your eyes closed and your mind distracted by the shallow impulses of a robot. Without a miracle or a hero, I'm going to be taken out by the government any moment. And all this time, all these years, no one lifted a finger. I just got another letter from the government. Going to check it now. I wanted to get this video done before I do. Likely another closing in attempt are going to get me from some new angle or whatever. It's never ending. Let's see what happens. I'll find out in a moment.